Hello everybody,
Hello,
and welcome
everybody.
to our webinar, Collaborating on an Animatic While Working from Home. For this webinar, we're going to explore Flix from the perspective of a production coordinator, a story artist, a director, and an assistant editor. We're going to create this project from scratch and work through creating and finishing a sequence in Flix while working with Photoshop and Avid. We're going to explore pre-production workflows from storyboard to editorial, and we'll have a quick peek on how using the Flix API will enable us to hand off to production. Flix will be the key to all of this, and it's going to allow our team to work seamlessly and collaboratively from across the world. Terry, the head of creative services for the Americas at Foundry, is located in Toronto, Canada, and will be the production coordinator as well as the story artist for our project. Brice, Flix's own product manager at Foundry, is located in London, England, and he will be the assistant editor on the project. And finally, Martin, the head of creative services for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, is located in Vienna, Austria, and he will be the director for our project. Now let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch Flix. Our team is all working remotely, and we're going to first assume the role of the production coordinator. We're going to need to set up a project so the team and anyone else with input can have something to work with. So here's our login page. Our login method is going to be set up by the IT department. We'll have a look at both options, but first we're going to log in as administrator as we want to make some changes at a studio level. So we don't have any shows set up at the moment. Let's go ahead and head over to the new show button and fill in some data. So the tracking code is a short code which will be helpful for our naming conventions. We're going to get to that a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and enter THP, and the title of our show is The Happy Prince. We can go ahead and add a description for the show if we want, and we can also select a preview image. I have one already handy, so let's go ahead and add that. So the next section is the configuration portion. So from here we can go ahead and set up our frame rate. So we have the option to change our project to episodic, which will give us additional layers, episode, and season when it comes to sequences, as well as naming convention. Ours is not, it's a feature, so we're going to go ahead and just turn that off. And we can also set up our aspect ratio from here. And lastly, we have our permissions. So this is where we introduce the idea of work groups. So what this means is if we want certain people to have certain access to shows, we can assign those groups here, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later on. So right now I'm going to go ahead and select default and create. So just like that, we've created our new show. Now if we hover over it, we'll see that all of the information that has regarding the show as well as a description. And if we select it, we'll be prompted to build a new sequence. Since we don't have any sequences set up, we can go and do this right away. And we always have access at a later point where we can go and add additional sequences if we need to. So from here, we're going to go ahead and enter a tracking code. So we'll do 01 for sequence 1. The title of the sequence, we can enter an act and comments if we want to. So now we can quickly go and build out additional sequences. Now this is something that is nice and fluid inside of Flix, where we can build out tons of sequences in succession just like that. So now that the project is set up, our artists can get to work. But it'd probably be smart to first set up some rules for the production to follow, like naming conventions, settings when communicating with Avid. So let's go and look at where those are located. Since we're logged in as administrator, we can access the management console. This way we can set up how things outside of Flix stay organized and consistent. So from here we can see all the users that are associated with our Flix. We can create new ones. Here's the group management, where we can go in and create groups and assign people to those groups. So if we want to have specific access for people to certain projects, we would create the groups here. This way they'll only be able to see the shows that they're assigned to through the groups. What we want to hone in on here is the studio settings. We want to jump under third-party apps and general. And what we want to do is make sure that we have our sketching tool set up and that Avid Media Composer is the only editorial package that Flix can publish to. And we'll do this by ensuring we enforce this at a studio level. We want to make sure that our clip and sequence naming convention is set up. So we have these name chips that are being used to automatically generate the names of our sequences and clips. And underneath, you can see that we have the different chips that are available. So we can add additional ones, whichever makes sense for the studio or what we've agreed upon. We also want to do the same thing, not for the clips, but also for the sequence. And very important, we want to make sure that our published directory is somewhere that everyone can access to it on editorial. Now I want to do the same thing for the Avid Media Composer options. At this point, we would want to sit down with our editor and just agree upon preferred settings and make sure that we enforce them so no matter who is publishing, all deliveries will be consistent. And then finally, for our exporting, we want to make sure that there's times where we need to export PSDs or QuickTimes for whatever reason, that everything is organized during these exports. So not only the naming conventions, but also where these will be exported to. A couple of things to note is if we were to log in as a user and go under our user preferences, these options would be grayed out as these are set at an administrative and a studio level. And another thing to note is if you want to set these options per show, we can click on the menu icon for the show on the homepage and then enforce these preferences at a show level rather than at a studio level. Okay, so as a production coordinator, we've set up the project and preferences, so now let's become an artist and complete the first pass for a sequence using different Photoshop workflows. So now we're back at the login screen. We're an artist that's working remotely, and this time we're going to connect as a user. So we're going to go ahead and log in through the other method that IT has set up, and we're going to log in securely through Google. So let's go ahead and sign in with Google. I'm going to choose my account, and then allow. And now we have access to the show. So we can go ahead and select the show, and then there are our sequences. So we'll select the first sequence. And since there's no revisions or sequences that currently exist, we're going to go ahead and start with a clean version. So now we're at a portion of the UI we're going to spend the most time at. So now when we launch Photoshop, we can see a bunch of commands that come with Flix, and this is going to make it easier for us as an artist to focus on creating content rather than worrying about naming conventions, where to save things, where to export things, and keeping track of all our PSDs. So let's go ahead and make sure our aspect ratio is correct, and we'll start a new template. So at this point, let's draw something out. So a little bit of magic here to get that done. And now we can go and select the current image. If we jump back to Flix, we'll see that there's communication happening on the back end, and now our first board has showed up. So let's jump back over to Photoshop. I'm going to turn on another layer, and then I'm also going to send the current image over. So now we're beginning to build out all of our panels. We can see the two. Now instead of turning on a layer and then sending the current image, we can do this using an each layer command that we have inside of here. So I'm going to go and choose the each layer plus the BG. So what will happen is that command will automatically turn on and off each layer, keeping the background on, and then we have our panels now inside of Flix. Now, something important to mention here, especially as you start creating multiple panels from a single PSD, it's a good idea to ensure that you have the Always Send Original as Master checkbox turned on. When it's toggled on, the master image that's sent will be the original PSD that contains all the layers, layer comps, etc., whether the layer is visible or not. And you're going to want to keep track of that, especially when you need to make a change to multiple panels that share the same layer or layers. Without it toggled on, Flix will send the PSD over that contains visible layers and exclude the layers that are not visible. If we have more poses that reuse the same elements inside a single PSD file, it makes more sense for us to use layer comps or timeline frames, and we have a command that will deal with that as well. So from here, we can see we have our different layers in the comp form. And what we can do is we can go ahead and send the each layer comp over. So if we select that button, all of our panels will begin to appear inside of Flix. So we're really automating this back and forth communication between Photoshop and for Flix. For the next scene or shot, maybe it's easier to visualize everything in a single document, and we can do this via thumbnails. So we have a new thumbnail template that we're going to build out. Then once we've boarded everything, I'm going to use the send thumbnails, which will send each thumbnail as a panel over to Flix. So all the magic will happen behind the scenes, and then if we jump back over to Flix, once that's ready, everything will show up inside of our panel browser. Now we're going to need to complete the sequence, so as time passes, we've built everything out, and the sequence is complete. Now maybe we need to rough in some dialogue because we want to just get a general idea of timing. Let's go ahead and do that. It's going to make this easier when we record the pitch as well. So we can use the record button, and we can begin to record some timing if we want to just give a general idea of pacing here. So in our viewer, what we're going to do is hit the record, And from here, we're going to be using the arrow keys, and Flix is actually recording the timing. We can record the audio if we want as well, or we can choose to mute it if we just want to record the timing. Okay, once we've done that, we can go ahead and play back and see that now the timing that we've just put in has been recorded. Okay, so I think we've done our first pass at this. So what we're going to do is add a comment that it's ready for review, and then we're going to save. So now for the person that's going to be taking a look at it, if they go under the sequence, they'll see the comment that says ready for review. And now we're ready to move on to our next step.
Hello everybody, my name is Martin and I'm the director for the show. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to review the sequence and add any comments or annotation on anything that needs to be adjusted or fixed. So what we're going to do, we're going to go and navigate to the sequence. I'm going to find the revision that Terry has marked for review, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on it. So from here we are on the same state that Terry left it at, so everyone is on the same page. So now I want to get a feeling how the panels are playing out. So I'm going to use the playback tool for the pitch that was recorded, and I can begin to get the overall feel on how the panels are flowing together. So once I've done that, I do see a couple of things I would like to add notes to. So let's go to a panel, and I'm looking for a panel number 2 here. And I do think this would work better if the bird was flying closer to camera. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and select the comments, and I'm going to add a comment to fly the bird closer to the camera. So when I hit enter, we'll see that I have already added a comment. It says that it was done by me. It is the time and the version that the comment has been applied to. Also, the panel has now an icon above it stating that there has been a comment added. Okay, so for this next section, during the playback, I feel like it would benefit if you had one more frame to help the bird traverse down to the statue. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna add a couple of things. First off, I'm gonna add an annotation because I wanna draw exactly where I feel the bird should be. So I can go in and I can adjust the size, and I can also adjust the color of the annotation. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and draw to get to the area where this in between, where the bird will be in the in-between, and then I'm also gonna leave a comment. So add the in-between. So we will notice at the panel number 3 there is a comment icon, as well as annotation icon, and the inner panel is highlighted. So for this next section, as we are approaching the statue and we can clearly see it, I feel it would work better if we can draw more visual attention to the statue. So I want to create a comment that's going to indicate that, and it's going to take place across a couple of panels. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and shift select the panels, and then I'm going to add a comment to increase the size of the statue. Okay, great. So the next thing I want to do for this panel, panel 29, I want to push in on the frame more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add an annotation as well as leave a comment. I'm going to grab the annotation tool and I'm going to draw. And then also let's add a comment here. Push into frame. Great. Okay. So we also have these highlights, and these are arbitrary in meaning, but as a studio we decided that they will be used for shot status. And I can use these to mark up shots where there might be an issue. For instance, these 3 panels here, I want to rework them completely. So at this point I don't want the artist to do any additional work on them. So I'm going to mark them with this orange highlight like this. And then I'm also going to grab another frame that I may get rid of, or I want to do some serious change to it, so I'm gonna select it and place the red highlight on it to put it on hold. So I think at this point I'm done with the review of this first pass. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave a comment that it was reviewed by me, and then I'll hit save.
Okay, I'm back as a story artist, and my goal here is to address all the feedback that Martin, the director, has left before we can deliver the sequence to editorial. So I'm going to go and navigate to the sequence, and then the revision where Martin has marked reviewed. So now that I'm inside the sequence, I can see that there is more icons. We have annotations and notes, and there's even some highlights. So let's begin to start addressing the revisions. So I'm going to jump over to panel 2, and I can hover over the little comment icon, and that's going to give me a peek into what the last comment is, and it's fly bird closer to camera. I can select the icon as well, and that's going to open up the comments box. Okay, so I know what I need to do for this one. I'm going to go ahead and double click to open it up in Photoshop, make my change. And I'm going to use the replace current image command, and this will replace that current image over in the panel inside of Flix. So we can see this update. Okay, now I want to create another revision. I just want to add a variation and then let the production decide on which works best. So I'm just going to increase the size of it, and this time I'm just going to use Control S to quickly save, and I'll also update it inside of Flix. So with that, I'm ready to take a look at the two variations. I can go in and switch between. There's my original, and then I'm going to switch to the second revision, and then the third. So I'm going to leave a note that I've addressed the revisions, added a variation, and it can be decided on which one works best. Okay, I am ready to go to the next one now. So for this one, let's go ahead and select panel 3. Hover over the comment, and I can see it's to add it in between, and then I can toggle on the annotations by selecting the annotation icon on top of the panel there. Okay, I know I need to add it in between. I have some guidance on where we're going to place that, so let's double click on the image. And now we're inside of Photoshop. So just note that we have this annotation layer that's come over from Flix, and this is going to help for reference of where I want to place the bird. So once I have it in position, I'm going to turn off my annotation, and then at this point, I want to go in and send the current image over. I'm using the current image because I want it in between. I need a new panel in between 3 and 4, and there we go. Now let's just thumb through this and see if it works. And it feels pretty good, so it's working, and I'm going to leave a comment in here that has been addressed. Okay, so now on to the next one. This one is a comment that is going to affect multiple panels, and this is to increase the size of the statue. So I want for this one to open the master, and the reason I want this is because I want access to all of the layers that's inside the Photoshop file that's using the layered comps. So I'll select the Photoshop icon and then open up the file. Let's go ahead and make our change. Now the nice thing about using the layered comps in Photoshop is that when I need to make a sweeping change that's going to affect multiple panels, I can do it on this layer, and it's going to affect all of the different layered comps. So it's a nice way when we have these large changes that are going to affect multiple panels. So now in this case, I want to replace each layer comp, and when I select that over inside of Flix, each one of those panels will get updated with a change. So just like that, I'm able to change 4 panels quite quickly. So now let's go ahead and leave a comment here that it's been addressed. Okay, so let's move on to panel 29. And for this, we have a comment saying push into frame, and let's get that annotation on. And this is pretty straightforward, so let's go ahead and make the change. Let's double click on it. It's going to open it up automatically in Photoshop. Now for this, what I'm going to do is use the selection tool. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, draw out the area where I want to push into, and this time I'm going to use the replace cropped current image command. And what this will do is update it inside of Flix, cropping it into that selected area. I'm going to add a comment saying it's been addressed, and I'm ready to send this off. So I'm going to go ahead and leave a comment, feedback addressed, and let's save this. So at this point, we've done our revisions, and let's hand it off to the production coordinator. I'm back wearing a different hat. I'm now the production coordinator, and what I want to do here is go and make sure that all the feedback has been addressed before I send this off to editorial. So I'm going to navigate into the sequence and find the revision where it says that the feedback has been addressed, and now I'm inside of the sequence. So I can see there's quite a few comments. There's updated numbers on the panels, meaning that there's revisions. So I want to go to the panel filter, and I want to filter out everything except for the commented ones. This way I can focus in on what needs to be addressed. So I'm going to go and look at the comment. I'll hover over, select the comment, and then I can see that there's a variation here. So I'm going to choose which one I feel is working better, and I like the larger one. So now I'm going to check off these comments, and then notice that the comment icon has now disappeared from that panel. Now I'm going to continue and go through the rest of these and make sure that all the revisions have been addressed, and then I will finish up with that. Okay, at this point, everything looks good. I'm going to save this with a comment that it was reviewed and approved, and I want to send this off over to editorial. So I'm going to use the Publish to Editorial button. So from here, we have some options, and we can generate a contact sheet, generate a dialog file. I definitely want those two on. And we can even leave a comment if we want. Now, the publish directory is already set for us. We can see that below, and that's because if you remember earlier on, we set that up and we enforced that at a show level. So I no longer have to worry about what path it's going to go into, as well as the naming conventions. Let's press publish. So Flix is now generating everything that we requested. We're getting that contact sheet that's being generated, the dialogue, as well as the images for publishing. So not only that, it's going to also send an automated email to everyone in production notifying that something's been pushed to editorial. So once that's done, the publishing folder will automatically open up, and inside of here you can see that we have all our AAFs, we have our contact sheet, as well as the dialogue. So let's look at the naming convention for a second. If you remember earlier when we first set up our project, in the management console we enforced the naming convention at a studio level, and how we set up the editorial sequence was the show tracking code, the sequence tracking code, and then the sequence revision number. Now if we look at what's been published on disk, we could see that there's our show tracking code, THP, our sequence tracking code, which is 01, and the version of the sequence revision. So we've automatically generated this nice, tidy naming convention. So let's open up the contact sheet for a second. So the contact sheet has a lot of great information that's going to be passed along to editorial. They can take a look at this as they're setting things up, and this way they'll know if there's any new panels that have been created. They'll be marked with that new tag that we see on top of here. Now currently everything has it because this is our first pass to editorial, so everything is considered new. Now it's up to the editorial department to go and grab the AAFs and the dialogue file and import the edit into Avid.
Hi, my name is Brice. I'm going to be the assistant editor on this project. So I got the AAF file that Terry's published from Flix. So I'm just going to drag and drop them into my Avid project, which will create all the clips for me, as well as a sequence that I can just double click on to see it directly in my timeline. So I do have the timing from story in this case because I did want to see that rough timing that Terry has recorded earlier. I know there's also a dialogue file that's been provided along with this publish, so I'm just going to use the subcap effect to import those captions and display them directly in my Avid timeline. And now you'll see that that has created some clips on my V2 track with the dialogue in there. So obviously I'll play around with the placement of those captions. All right, so we're going to fast forward a little bit. So I put everything in Avid, and now the editor's taken over, and they've done a lot of things to the edit. So obviously played around with the timing a lot. There's a few shots that needed retiming. Second thing you'll notice is all the markers that have been added to start breaking down my shots, breaking down my sequence into shots. So they're all available on V1 on the first video track in there. Other things that we did, so we added a little camera move on this first board. Then so obviously we moved the dialogue position, and we added a couple of boards in there. We thought the statue would look better on a panel on its own. So we actually used 3 different panels to create that. We used the statue from one board, we used the bird from another board, and the background from a third board. And using a couple of effects like 3D warp and animate and resize and paint effects, and all very basic effects that you would have used in animation in editorial. And then we use this 2.5D push on this castle shot right here, because this is, you know, what the director wanted to then show in the final version. So now that we have all that, we're actually pretty happy with the sequence and happy to send it back to Flix. So we're going to just need to prep that sequence. So first off, I don't want to see the dialogue burnt in on the boards in Flix. I'm going to disable that track. I also created my own mixdown for the audio, so I can just disable all those other audio tracks so that they don't get included in the AAF, because that can end up being a very, very heavy AAF file. From that point on, from Avid, I'm just going to export a single AAF file. Avid will take care of rendering all the effects that are on that sequence, just so that Flix can just read the AAF whenever there's an effect. It will grab those frames in and place them in the sequence where required. All right, now that Avid is done exporting the AAF, I'm going to jump back into Flix, find the AAF I just exported, and tell Flix to import that. I'm going to use render all frames to actually display all the effects directly back in Flix, and click on import. So once Flix is processing the AAF, you'll notice there's going to be a bunch of clips directly relinking. There's been no effects added to those, and some clips with effects. You know, the first one has a resize with that little camera move, and then there's the two panels that we added on which we added some effects. So those will come back as ref panels as well. So now that's imported, I'll hand it back over to Terry, who will just have a look at Flix and see how this import turned out.
All right, this is Terry, and I'm now back as production coordinator, and I'm ready to take a look at the sequence that is back from Brice, the assistant editor. I'm going to navigate to the revision marked back from edit, and notice we also have a check mark letting us know that it's coming from editorial. Now, when we open this up, we notice we have some visual changes to our sequence in Flix. First thing I notice is that we now have markers in here. The markers are added in Avid, and it's now breaking out our sequence down into shots, and that's fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and play through the sequence to see the adjustments made by Brice, and then inspect any changes that involve our story artist. Alright, I've gone through it and I see the most obvious change is timing, but now let's look at some specifics. In our first panel, we can see a reference icon. This is referring to any effects that were done to this panel into Avid, so we want to focus in on those. If I play, we can see that it's a pull out on frame. Now this is not going to require a revision from our story artist. For these situations when we come back from edit and there are effects that don't require a revision, as a studio we decided that we're going to highlight these panels in green so that everyone's aware and the story artist knows that it's not going to require a revision. Now let's go down to the next panel with the reference icon. Okay, we can see that the bird has been removed and it's coming in during the next panel. So editorial wants the statue by itself before the bird arrives. Now this is going to require the story artist to make a revision. Now since these changes are quite obvious and our studio is quite comfortable with our highlighting system, we're going to highlight these panels with the decided color of blue. Story will know that it needs to be addressed, and if it needed specific instructions, we could use commenting or annotations. Now let's look at the next panel with the reference icon. This is a 2.5D push-in, so Story won't need to do anything to this panel, but it's a great reference for production on what needs to be done to the shot. Let's go ahead and put the green highlight on this panel. Okay, now I'm ready to save this. I'm going to comment that there are revisions from editorial, and then the story artist Terry can address these revisions. Okay, the revisions are done, and Terry is quite fast, so now let's take a look. We can see that the bird is gone, and the panel has been cleaned up nicely. That's great. And for the next panel, the bird is landing, and the board is also cleaned up. I'm going to remove the highlights at this point because we're good. Now, it's very possible that we'd be sending this back to edit and they can continue making adjustments. We would round trip between story and editorial for as many times needed. But for this sequence, we're good to go and ready to hand it off to production. I'm going to go ahead and save this and make a comment that it's ready for production handoff. As we wrap this up, let's look at an example of a script that our studio has created. This is going to allow us to push and pull data from Flix within Nuke Studio or Hero by talking to the Flix API. Let's navigate to the Window File menu and select Flix. We need to add the Flix server address and then log in. From here, we can choose which show we're working on. If we have multiple shows, they'll be listed here. Also, we can use all the sequences or choose a specific one. From here, we can now pull the latest revision or update what we have done back to Flix. Since we're starting off, let's go ahead and pull the latest revision from Flix. Okay, so we can see all the media has been brought in, and if we navigate to the sequence, we now have a built-out timeline. Our dialogue has come across as a soft effect on the clips. We even have the burn-in of our shot name and timecode as a sequence-based soft effect. Our markers have come across as tags in our timeline, and they hold metadata. So by talking to the Flix API with a script like this, we're going to push our workflow even further and save production even more time so they can get to work quickly. This example script will be made publicly available by the Flix team, along with other examples, including exporting to Shotgun. And that about wraps it up, and we were able to create an animatics with our remote team working across the world in a clear, organized workflow thanks to Flix.